Hello and welcome to week 11 in Introduction to Sociology. And we're going to be talking this week about one chapter, chapter 18, Work and the Economy. And of course, the economy has been a major topic in this year's election cycle. A mere 15 minutes ago, it was announced that Joe Biden won the presidency. Of course, a tumultuous time is ahead of us as people contest that. But ultimately, we're looking at a different perspective on the economy coming into the White House and the impact that they have, not only as a policymaker, but just in terms of perception of stability and whatnot, and how that affects markets and people's, what I think one of the most important statistics to watch, and that is consumer confidence. And I'll get a little bit into that and give you some soapbox sort of perspectives from my angle here. But let's take a look at the course book here. We have chapter 18, and it starts off with a jump in unemployment because of COVID-19, obviously things shutting down, and certainly we are at this point engaged. We have an uptake in that, and under a new presidency, going along with science. I mean, similar actually to here in the state of Maine. Our governor has basically turned to the experts on how to control a pandemic, and the results of that have been undeniable. I mean, Maine has actually enjoyed one of the best rates, even when compared to other rural states like the Dakotas. Our infection rate is way down, and just again, this weekend, there was an uptick in the requirements here in Maine in response to Dr. Shah's recommendations and his team. And I will say, an article was posted in my LinkedIn account from Scientific American, who did a spot on Dr. Shah, our infection control individual at the state level, and praising his straightforward, no holds barred, this is what's going on, but also action oriented, this is what you can do to help, working with the science as we discover more and more things and dealing with this. And I think we Mainers should be very proud of his work and what he's done. It has been obviously contentious and people have all kinds of feelings about it, but certainly, and there's been lots of real pain, real economic strain. And my wife and I and my family, we count our blessings and thank God that we have the jobs that we do, and we have not felt that same way. But I'm also sympathetic to many of you who might be struggling with unemployment, with making ends meet and whatnot. And hopefully we're looking for brighter days here. So back to the course book. So it starts off a little, a sobering idea about unemployment, and the notion being that economies, that's where I got it from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, economies are largely like a circulatory system. Money is the blood, and then it goes through, and the movement of money is really what drives an economy. So when we have too much in savings or too much spending, it kind of throws it off. So it's always this balancing act between investing and putting money into, and locking it up into buildings and whatnot, and then the fluid money that allows consumers to go out and buy stuff. A factory won't build anything unless there's somebody buying those products. So it's going to be, my sort of angle on economics has really a lot to do with consumer confidence and our willingness to spend our money, to keep that blood flowing, to keep that money flowing in our economy. So we talk, right off, we look at different economic systems, different theories about the role of regulation in government. And that's really kind of what we look at when we look at the different models that are out there that have happened throughout history. And as outlined, in very outlined format here, we have the agricultural revolution doing an incredible change in terms of our economy, because basically not everybody had to grow their own food anymore, and that left them to do other things, and people had more time on their hands as machines replaced manual labor, and an incredible revolution. We had the notion of bartering, what we might see in like the standard, let's say a lawn sale, kind of, which I think kind of epitomizes capitalist economies. We have exchange economies. I'll give you 3 cows for 10 chickens, or something like that, so exchange. There's money itself, which represents value. So you have paper money, and although it's technically not paper, it's actually a fabric. And that's why it doesn't disintegrate in your washing machine. That would be horrible. And coins, and throughout history we've developed this symbolic ways. Like, I have a cow to sell you, but I have enough chickens, and all you have is chickens, so why don't you just give me money, and I can use that to go over here and buy shoes. That kind of developing of an economy based on a symbolic representation of value that we call money. We have mercantilism, people who are creating products that they would normally, in history, we would create our own clothes, we would make our own shoes, and then the mercantile industry came along. Wait a minute, I'm really good at doing clothes. I'm going to spend more time creating clothes that I don't need. I'm going to make a lot more because somebody else is growing my food. I don't have to do that anymore, so I can make extra. And then the individual who used to make their own clothes goes, well, I'm not that good at making clothes, so I'll just go buy clothes over here, and that frees me up to do other things. I guess I really like working with animals. I'll take care of people's dogs if they're sick. So we have the shop owner of a clothing store and the veterinarian, kind of these evolving systems within our society based on what we do. Then, of course, we have the Industrial Revolution, when we take that mercantilism and we make it industrial. We start producing thousands of goods and services, mass production, farming from just to make enough for us to eat largely disappears, and we move into post-industrial societies and the information age. So a little bit of a history lesson there. And we then enter into this conversation about types of economies. And just keeping in mind that the complexity of our society is that there's really no true capitalist, socialist, or communist economies. And we want to talk about those as economic theories, not their ancillary, political science theories. And so you have to look at, kind of how is the blood flow managed within a society? Are there regulations that help keep it healthy? Are there who owns what? Can you own things yourself and whatnot? So the first theory we're encountering, of course, is capitalism. Now, capitalism engages that there's this really grew out of that mercantile period in time, where say I own all these clothes. There is a demand for my clothes. I set a reasonable price, and that reasonable price is largely at the beginning largely negotiated. How bad do you want it, and what did it cost for me to make it? And negotiating a place where I make a little money and you get what you want, and that natural bartering process sets the price. If I have a lot of them I want to get rid of, maybe I'll lower the price. So you get that relationship between supply and how much demand there is out there. If I have 3 of them and there's 50 people lined up to get those 3, I can raise the price. So the demand is higher than the supply, so therefore it affects the price. And these natural mechanisms of bartering that we see so well explained in the experience of the Maine lawn sale, a great capitalist structure within our society, is the perceived value of something from the customer, and the perceived value of the something from the seller determines the price. And that mechanism is self-correcting. That mechanism is, if there's too much of something, it's going to go down. If something is horrible, like say all these clothes I've made, there's lots of them, they're cheap, but they all fall apart after a while, then eventually we don't want those kinds of products in our society, and I go out of business and I have to go find something else to do, and you don't buy shoddy products, and that this natural mechanism produces the best products at the best reasonable price. Now that's the theory. That's the theory of it. Now that private ownership of stuff, I own all of the clothes, can become consolidated. And we're seeing that, of course, in our society now, when the owners of the means of production can consolidate more and more and more wealth and more property and whatnot. And in a capitalist economy, the goal of the owner of the means of production is to make money. The goal of the worker in the factory is to make money. So they're kind of opposed to each other in this natural order of things. I own things. I am hiring you. I need you because I can't run all these machines, but you need me because I'm going to pay you for your labor. So there's a negotiation. The employee accepts, or maybe they don't have a whole lot of choices, but they accept the wage in exchange for their time. So there's a bartering mechanism there, and if you're ever in a position to barter for your salary or benefits or any other way that you perceive value as exchange for your time, you have that ability to negotiate. Oftentimes we don't. This is what I'm paying, and that's it. And then in that exchange, the employee would like to make more, and the employer, largely, particularly in manufacturing and service industries, their largest expense is labor. So they want to minimize that to maximize their own profit. And sometimes that can become imbalanced. In fact, in the theory of capitalism, periods of recession and prosperity are naturally occurring cycles. So as we head into a recession, let's say, is when the prices start to go up. They start to affect demand. Prices there's demand that will push the price up, but sometimes it goes too far as industries seek to be more profitable, and it starts to affect the demand, and those cycles begin to become offset from one another, and we end up with maybe too much product or too little product. Prices become unmanageable, and we go into a period of time where, and this is the death knell, this is the bell that goes up when people stop spending money. That's the critical piece. If I'm not buying new TVs, me, the consumer, if I'm not buying new TVs, the TV industry goes down. If I'm not buying new cars, the car industry goes down. So purchasing things is what makes we have a consumer-based economy. So our capitalist consumer-based economy depends on me spending money. So when you look at interventions into that, how do we intervene in that? And this is a little soapbox on my philosophy of this. If the government's going to partake in the various ways that it can, what's the best way? Now we see that we may intervene with the loan rate. So there's the prime rate set by the Federal Reserve, which is the loan rate for banks. When they borrow money to give you money, because they don't keep all their money in the bank, you've all seen It's a Wonderful Life. Got a really good lesson on banking in America at the end of that show. And when they borrow at that, 1.5% or something, then they loan you at 12%. That difference is the profit for the bank. That's why they're making money. When you put money in your bank and you save it there, that goes into that whole network. There's money being made. I'm making, on my savings at least, I'm making very, very small money. If I want to make a little bit more interest money, I might put it in savings bonds, but then I can't immediately get that out. There's a time frame for that, all the kinds of ways. So if we set the prime rate, then companies can borrow money to create factories and create more jobs. But in addition, individuals can borrow money, might be more prone to borrow money. If I can get my new car at 2% rather than 4%, and borrow for that car, if you're in the borrowing money for car field, then I might increase spending. So messing around with the the prime rate is a way to affect the economy, and the government kicks in, the Federal Reserve kicks in. Other ways is through tax breaks, through infusion money, and we saw some really great examples of this. We saw the car industry several years ago undergo a real big problem with their debt ratio, and because car sales had gone down. And there was the bailout. Now that bailout included paying the money back. So the U.S. government consolidated money through the World Bank, or through the U.S. banks, which largely make up the World Bank, and loaned money. Maybe it was 0%. I don't know. It was the loan money, and to get those companies over the difficult time that they were, and the companies sometimes had to reorganize, and they had to start making better decisions, and then they had to pay that money back, and most of them did. I think Ford Motor Company, look it up, might be Chevy, depending on what fan you are. Ford Motor Company paid back everything like in 3 weeks. They just needed that stimulus to get them back on their feet. And so you have stimulus going into industry, either direct payments into industry, or you have tax relief on the taxes that industry pays, and that generates, confidence on companies to keep on producing and whatnot. But then you have the stimulus check that came out. Another example, the stimulus checks that went to many people and related to COVID. And the stimulus was not. And it's interesting to look at the motivation behind this. This wasn't money that you were supposed to save. This was money they wanted you to spend. Now, for many people, it was necessary things that they spent for. They were struggling to make rent. They were struggling to make payments. There's, all of these things. And that was a way to kind of catch up on that, similar to what was going on in industry. But there was others that got the money. It was kind of a bonus check. Sort of like for some people, they get their tax return and like, oh, this is extra money. And they went out and spent it. And that's exactly what they wanted to do. If people have money to spend, then factories are going to keep those jobs open. Now, my little soapbox on that is that it's, for the short term, it's wiser to give the middle class and below money, like a stimulus check, because chances are they're going to go spend it, and that gets the blood moving in the economy. Starts to rebalance those supply-demand curves. If you give money solely to industry, no matter how much money they have in their bank, they might be able to make all their payments, they might be able to say, do all that. But if nobody's buying their product, they're still going to lay people off, and they're still going to close factories if there's no buyer at the end. So there's sort of in the short term, immediate response to recession stuff is to give people money, give them tax breaks, give them stimulus funds, whatever. So there's our capitalism in a nutshell. There's a lot of energy and dedication and commitment to the idea of capitalism in the United States and in other Western nations, largely in contrast to this other one, which is socialism. Now, socialism is a word that carries a lot of emotion to it, and to give some history to that, we have to recognize that in World War II, under Hitler, he created the People's Socialist Party, the Nazis, and they had the word socialist in it. And the idea of socialism was the government would take over the ownership of the means of production and produce those things for the benefit of all. Now, the extreme take on this is, of course, communism. Now, communism over the years as a national economy has proved to be a failure. It simply does not work on the large scale. It does work on the small scale. Every single one of our families is communist in terms of an economy. We don't refer to the refrigerator as mom and dad's refrigerator. We refer to this as our refrigerator, even though those little people living with you never contributed to buy that. So it's a classic communal ownership of all the things. This is our house. This is our refrigerator, our dog. And so we recognize that communal piece to it. Now, partway through is in socialism, for all the way from capitalism to communism, there's that range of interventions from the government. To what degree do we want the government intervening in the natural order of exchange that we get in pure capitalism without going so far into the failed mechanisms of communism? And so some people might think that there are some industries that should be regulated, and there are. The communication industries, the electrical industries. We have the Public Utilities Commission that monitors supply and demand in utilities. We have market factors. We have bank regulatory programs that say, you can't just lend to anyone even though it's not your money. Because you think about banks, they're lending your money out, and you don't want them willy-nilly giving that to anybody. So there's regulations as to what they would invest in, where they put their money. I mean, if you think about an investor at a bank could take your money, and they can be as risky as they want. But there's limits on that. There's limits on that were from the beginning of banking, and there were limits on that actually happened after the Great Depression, when banks were way overextended in terms of their loans, and the economy came crashing down. So when everything is owned by the government, it's communism, and certainly that's not a goal. But when some specific, maybe logical things are run by the government, or they're run collectively because we want everybody to enjoy those things, then those are financed publicly and controlled publicly. So our government itself is a socialist institution. We all contribute our taxes, and it funds the government. Because I'm busy teaching, I don't want to necessarily have to be burdened with all those decisions that have to be made at the legislature. And I want them to protect us and, do what's right for us. The police are publicly funded. The fire department, publicly funded. Schools are publicly funded. We all perceive that we don't want those things to be necessarily competitive, and we want everybody to be able to get them at any time. And certainly, if we call the police over because someone, has stolen all the carrots out of our garden, imagine if the police came over there, did the investigation, and then left you a bill. And if you didn't pay the bill, they're not going to further investigate this. Wow, that's not what we want. And certainly we want to collectively contribute to some industries because we want to make sure those are all enjoyed by everybody. We think that our society is so. Public roads, public rec, national parks, state parks, waterways, environmental protection, the highway system, some parts of aviation and communication. I mean, we want these things. And for me, I think we've pretty much got a lot of this down. I agree with the public ownership or the socialization of particular things. I like the police being a socialized agency. I want two more. I want healthcare and internet access. That's my dream. I would like to see universal healthcare be a one-payer system. This is not socialized medicine. It's a step toward that, but it's not definitively not a downward slope toward that. In pure socialized medicine, everybody that works in the industry is a government employee. That is not the case in most places that have socialized medicine. Let's say Canada, that has, we'll be talking about that in the next chapter, about what Canada has. And they're private people, private hospitals, private doctors, but there's only one insurance company. That would be good, because then we'd all pay the same, it'd be equitable. Internet access has become as important as the roads. And we have public roads, they're maintained to develop and create and support commerce. .com stands for commerce. That's true, .com, C-O-M. The internet is now our primary means of commerce. And I believe that access to that should be as free as the roads. and they should be maintained well. We don't want any potholes in the internet highway. So that brings us to issues of globalization that I go into. You have these two economies. We have different flavors of that all over the world. We have economies that depend on each other. We have exports and imports. At the time of the writing of this, under President Trump, we dissolved the North American Free Trade Agreement, and we are now into the USMCA, and I have a little video on that in there. We're looking at mechanisms where companies are spread out internationally, and they'll be able to farm out manufacturing or raw material procurement and whatnot on a national scale. I really think, and I'm going to give our presidents a little buy on this, I think the process by which companies move overseas and American jobs are lost happen in the boardroom. They don't, of the companies. They just see the opportunity to have cheaper labor, and ultimately that's that ownership of the means of production. And it's actually cheaper to manufacture American cars overseas and then ship them back than it is to manufacture some American cars right here. So how bizarre is that? And so there's, in terms of when you're talking about that scale of economies, those decisions to go overseas or to close a plant in Wyoming and open it up in Mexico are largely not governmental decisions. So the impact that the outside of incentives to stay, I'm not sure what impact the U.S. government or the presidency would ultimately have on that. These are private businesses that are moving overseas. So you can look at that a little bit. You look at the changing workplace right now, and of course, thinking about what we're doing right now in the middle of a COVID pandemic. And wow, things have changed. Things that were done face-to-face now being online. Some businesses not even in existence anymore simply because the demand has gone down. I mean, I'm not sure how good the massage therapists are doing or how good the hairstylists are doing, and with having to manage social distancing and physical contact and whatnot. These industries have been changing dramatically as a result of this. This was happening before. When we're looking at the list here: outsourcing, automation, changes in education, technology, gender, immigration. Each one of these is changing the workplace as we know it, and we need to be on top of it. We need to be open to change. We need to be open to be light on our feet. Maybe right now I have peers at KVCC that are really distressed about losing that face-to-face connection with their students and feeling that their jobs don't really have the same meaning. They're still kicking butt, there's no doubt. I mean, there's no plan to stop or anything like that, but really feeling like, is this really what I want to do? If this was going to continue like this, maybe I don't want to be a teacher, you know. Nobody's quite at that level yet, but there's discussion, a frustration about how something has changed in what we do as employees, and we're really feeling that. Okay, so you read through the rest of the course book here, and we go into the assessments, and I'm asking for a discussion on how COVID-19 has affected you right here, and we're right in the middle of it. It's rising again, and so this is very, very, very current. How did it affect your job? How did it affect your family? How did, all of that stuff? And looking at this from the economic standpoint. And then in the quiz, I want you to get your head wrapped around the way I've talked about capitalism and socialism, and the fact that a mixture of those, what we call a mixed economy, truly what represents most economies, including the U.S., is a mixed economy. And there are some things where you want capitalism because you want the power of better products and that negotiation of price and whatnot. And then there's some things that maybe should be socialized. And so I want you to give me not only the definitions, but also give me an example, a very clear example of something that works better, that you think works better, as in a capitalist environment and something that works better in a socialist environment. So make sure those examples are very specific and not an extended definition. We kind of feel like we want to do that sometimes, but I want a specific example. And it could be something that's real, like this is happening and this is how it's working, or it could be something, this is the way it should be, like my thing about healthcare. Healthcare maybe should be a little bit more socialized, probably a lot more socialized. We'll get into that in the next chapter next week. So I will see you in the discussion boards.